The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Hello folks, time for another week of action here in Oxfordshire, and this week I'm beginning South Oxfordshire. We're here for the very first time. I'm in a village which is sort of semi-familiar to me actually, because I saw this one on the map last time I was in Charwell. You remember that? Earlier last year when I did Islip. This is the next village over, so if you're from Islip and you saw that episode, you may well know this place. Now I'm beginning this one opposite an entrance to what is effectively a school these days. It didn't used to be a school, it used to be a country house. We'll talk a bit about that in this episode. Now beyond the gates there you can see there's some old quarry workings. Now I can't obviously go beyond the gates to see those workings because it's private property. I'll just have to do that from here. You'll find that quarry, you'll find that school, and you'll also find a church and a cross here in the village and parish of Woodeaton. Woodeaton, settlement in a wooded clearing. This week on TVI we're in South Oxfordshire for the very first time, and we begin this series with a village that's just a couple of miles northeast of Oxford itself. This is Woodeaton, a small but fascinating village out in the countryside. The name Woodeaton began as the Old English Eaton, meaning a homestead or a settlement, probably in a clearing or near some water. By the 12th century, it became Woodeaton, two different words, likely to distinguish it from Water-Eaton, which isn't far away. Long before the village existed, there was a Romano-British religious site here. Archaeologists have found the remains of a temple just to the north of the present church. It was built in the 1st century AD, later replaced by a larger stone structure with a decorated plaster and surrounding wall. The temple site has produced many bronze objects, pottery and coins, showing that it was an important local shrine. These finds were collected over centuries and are now held in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. A surprising discovery at the temple site was a 6th century Anglo-Saxon pendant. Its presence suggests that Saxons visited or reused the sacred area long after the Romans left. By the 11th century, Woodeaton had a Saxon timber church. That early building was destroyed by a fire in around 1080, but it was quickly replaced by a Norman stone church between 1070 and 1120. The new church, dedicated to the Holy Rood, still stands today and contains Norman, Early English and later medieval features. In the 12th century, Helawys Avenel granted land in Woodeaton to Eynsham Abbey. The abbey held the manor for centuries and even had a grange and a manor courthouse in the village, although no trace of those buildings survive today. The manor changed hands several times until 1544, when it was bought by Richard Taverner, a famous translator of the English Bible. Taverner is best known for building a manor house here in the 1550s, and it's that house which is Woodeaton's other major landmark. In 1775, John Whelan demolished Taverner's old Tudor house and built the elegant Woodeaton Manor that stands today. In 1791, the architect Sir John Soane added fine interior features, including marble fireplaces and an ionic porch. Since 1950, the building has been Woodeaton Manor School, a special needs facility run by Oxfordshire County Council. We'll explore the histories of both the school and the church here, but Woodeaton has quite a lot more. Let's dive in and see exactly what. Kicking things off here, we have Woodeaton Quarry, a 7.3 hectare geological site of special scientific interest, located just to the northwest of the village. It's on the slope of Noak Hill, and this is a landscape shaped by Jurassic geology. The quarry is important because it contains one of the most complete Bathonian or Middle Jurassic rock sequences in Oxfordshire, dating to around 167 million years ago. These rocks belong to the Great Oolite group, and there are many exposed formations here. They include the Chipping Norton Limestone, Sharps Hill, Tainton Limestone, Rutland, White Limestone and Forest Marble formations. The quarry's southwest face contains the most complete exposed section, reaching a thickness of between 18 and 20 metres. Woodeaton Quarry is disused now, but it was previously worked for limestone and clay before being abandoned without restoration. Because the quarry was left unrestored, it contains sheer and unstable slopes, which are now part of those protected geological faces. In recent years, the quarry has been the subject of planning applications related to restoration using inert waste. Planning permission for this work was granted in 2015, allowing controlled importation of material to stabilise parts of the site. Now, as far as the school goes, you see the entrance gates to it there. We're not going to try and see the school from here. There is actually a place where we can get a really good view of Woodeaton Manor School, and we'll do that a little later on. We've got to walk through the village first though, and that means taking ourselves from this little area here, like a circle with some houses around it, down into the centre of Woodeaton, which is marked by the church and a cross on the village green. In the village itself now, here's one of the better known landmarks of Woodeaton. This is a Grade 1 listed medieval stone cross located on the village green. Its location is important because medieval crosses were often placed in central, open areas where people gathered. The structure consists of a tapering hexagonal shaft made of limestone, rising from a square base that sits on a 3-step plinth. The top of the shaft contains the stump of a missing finial, which would have once carried a carved crosshead. Historic England identifies the cross as a 13th century structure, making it one of the oldest surviving features in Woodeaton today. The cross is also close to the site of a Romano-Celtic temple that was located to the north of the church. You can think of this then as perhaps a more modern version of a religious gathering place, even though the cross itself is medieval. Okay, so we'll have a look at the church in a moment, which is right next door to the cross. As you can see, there's the cross and the church is up here. You see? We'll have a look at that in a moment. Between the two, on the other side of the road, there's a public footpath which leads to Cutslow, 2¼ miles. Now, we're not going all that distance. All we're doing here is walking up it for a short way so that we can see Woodeaton Manor School, which is away to the right-hand side. Opposite the green is a bridleway which we can use to full effect here to get a look at Woodeaton Manor School. The school occupies the historic Woodeaton Manor estate and the main building is Grade 2 listed. The school opened in 1950, but Woodeaton Manor has been here for a lot longer than that. The building that houses the school was originally a country house built in the 18th century and later altered in the 1790s by the architect Sir John Soane. The manor house was originally built for the Wayland family, who owned the Woodeaton estate in the 18th century. John Wayland commissioned the major rebuilding of the house in 1775, replacing an earlier Tudor structure built by Richard Taverner. Soane's work included interior improvements and architectural refinements that remain visible today. The presence of Soane's design elements gives the school a direct link to one of Britain's most important architects. As a place of education, this is an Academy Special School, which falls under the Propeller Academy Trust. It caters for pupils aged 7 to 18, making it a school that spans both primary and secondary age ranges. The school's website states that its ethos is based on reducing barriers to expand horizons, and that's a great way to describe its educational aims. The statement summarises the school's approach to supporting pupils with social, emotional, and mental health needs. This is Holyrood Church, which stands in the centre of Woodeaton. The building is listed Grade 1, a status granted on the 18th of July 1963. The main structure of the church dates from the 13th century, according to that listing. The church is built of limestone rubble with ashlar dressings. Limestone was the dominant building material in this part of Oxfordshire during the medieval period. The roof, though, is made of stone slate and lead, which are traditional materials used in many historic churches. This one consists of a nave, a chancel, a west tower and a south porch. Its layout is typical of small medieval parish churches. The chancel contains several original features, including a trefoil-headed piscina and a projecting sedilia, both dating from the 13th century. The tower is built inside the western end of the nave, supported by two tall octagonal piers. It has crenellations and pinnacles, which are typical of decorated Gothic architecture. The church contains a large early 14th century wall painting of St Christopher located above a blocked north door. St Christopher paintings were often placed opposite entrances so travellers could see them for protection. The one here includes a Norman French inscription, which is rare. The church also contains an 18th century panelled manorial pew which would have been reserved for the local landowning family, likely the Waylands or their successors. The bells in the belfry were given by a lord of the manor in 1680, and they are still rung occasionally for services. And by the way, the church takes its name from the medieval cross on the green. Such crosses were sometimes known as roods or holy roods. The proximity of the cross to the church suggests a long-standing relationship between the two structures. Now in the churchyard here, there's the grave of an Oxford surgeon, John Goodfellow. Here he is, died in 2011, and he's got a nice prominent place next to the church. Now I don't know how famous this guy was, but if he was famous, he's not the only guy who has that sort of connection to Woodeaton. You see, there's a guy who was quite good with things that go up into the sky, James Sadler. Here's a bit about him. Now here's a quirky little fact about Woodeaton which gives it a bit of aviation history. On the 4th of October 1784, James Sadler, the first Englishman to fly a hot air balloon, landed near the village after taking off from Oxford. His flight covered about 6 miles and reached an altitude of 3,600 feet, an astonishing achievement for the time. Sadler was born in Oxford in February 1753 and was baptised at St Peter in the East Church. His early life was firmly within the centre of the city. Sadler began experimenting with balloons in early 1784, several months before his first manned ascent. It was in February of that year that he launched an unmanned balloon from Cowley House, which is now part of St Hilda's College. That balloon travelled 79 miles before landing at Stansted in Kent, but of course there was nobody in it. It took him several months, but finally in October 1784 he became the first English aeronaut. The ascent took place near Christchurch Meadow in Oxford, close to the Botanic Garden. The balloon drifted north and landed near Woodeaton, and that fact is recorded on a plaque at Merton College's wall in Dead Man's Walk in Oxford. Did he go again after this first attempt? Yes, indeed he did. Sadler's second ascent took place that November, only 5 weeks after his first. This time he used a hydrogen-filled balloon, which was a different technology from his earlier hot air design. He travelled to Aylesbury in Buckinghamshire in about 20 minutes. In May 1785, Sadler attempted a long-distance flight from Moseleyhurst in Surrey. His goal was to reach France, but he only made it as far as the Thames estuary. The attempt followed an earlier successful channel crossing by Jean-Pierre Blanchard, which Sadler hoped to match. Sadler made 2 further ascents in 1785, including one from Manchester, where he launched from a field behind a gentleman's garden on the site now known as Balloon Street. Sadler's younger son, Wyndham William Sadler, also became an aeronaut and made several flights of his own. However, he died in a ballooning accident in 1824, which deeply affected his father. The tragedy occurred only 4 years before James Sadler's own death. James Sadler died in 1828 in Oxford, aged 75. He was buried at St Peter in the East Church, the same church where he'd been baptised. So that's Woodeaton, and it's hard not to feel the weight of how much history is packed into such a small place here. It's hard at first to look past things like the church, with its 13th century origins and medieval wall paintings. But Woodeaton also has a remarkable archaeological past. North of the church lies the site of a Romano-Celtic temple, where excavations uncovered coins, pottery and decorative plaster from the 1st to the 4th centuries. The village's manor house, now a specialist school, also has a long history of ownership by families such as the Whalens. Driving away, you do get the sense that Woodeaton is one of those rare places where each field, lane and stone has a story to tell. And thanks to James Sadler, so too does the sky.
Where the lighted beds cut deep through no hillside, an old temple ground lingers near the church's stride. Norman stone stands firm where the Saxons prayed, and sewing-touched halls watch over paths waylands made. Bronze in the soil, limestone in the breeze, a village shaped by long-kept memories. Oxfordshire spirit keeps the place alive. Cross on the green stands tall on its weathered base, steps worn smooth beneath the weight of time and grace. Manor walls now ring with the school's bright sound, where sewing's design still echo through the grounds. Coins in presence reign. Woodeaton, Woodeaton, oh I, oh I, oh I, where Sadler's balloon once drifted down from the sky. Woodeaton, Woodeaton, oh I, oh I, oh I. Oxfordshire spirit keeps the place alive.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Oxfordshire for episode number 2. Now I've ditched the gloves here because the first signs of spring are in the air. It's starting to get warmer. This hat might not survive till the end of the week either. We'll soon find out. Now, usually roadworks are a pain in the absolute you-know-what, but here they've done me a solid, and I'll show you why. Because, as you can see here, the road is closed down there, which means there's going to be no traffic coming through this village. And that's a good thing, because there's plenty of things I want to capture from this road. And if traffic's getting in my way, it might be difficult. The first thing to capture is this house right here. Lovely thatched cottage. That used to be the school in this place. There is still a school in this village. It's not your mainstream run-of-the-mill kind of school though. Welcome to Elsfield. Elsfield, Ellie's open land. Today on TVI we're in Elsfield, a small village in South Oxfordshire sitting on a hill above the River Cherwell and only about 3 miles from Oxford city centre. The name Elsfield likely comes from Old English roots, possibly meaning Ellie's open land or Ellie's field. Long before the Saxons, the land around Elsfield was used by prehistoric and Roman communities. The Cherwell Valley was a natural route for travellers, farmers and traders. Through the Middle Ages, Elsfield developed as a typical manorial village. The manor here passed through several important families, including the Eldsfields, the Hawes and the Pudseys. Each family left its mark. By the 18th and 19th centuries, the manor was part of a single large estate, which influenced the layout of the village. Many of the cottages and farm buildings you see here today date from that period, giving Elsfield its distinctive rural character, defined mainly by some gorgeous stone houses. In the middle of it all is the Church of St Thomas, which has stood here since at least the late 12th century. The churchyard is especially famous because it holds the ashes of John Buchan, the novelist and statesman best known for the 39 Steps. Buchan lived at Elsfield Manor from 1919 to 1935 and deeply loved this village. Elsfield Manor itself is a striking building. It has medieval origins but was remodelled many times. When Buchan lived there, it became a lively literary home, welcoming writers, politicians and thinkers. Well, today, it's going to welcome TVI. Elsfield has always been small. In the 1870s, it only had 42 houses and a population of 179. Even today, the parish remains tiny, but its small size is part of its appeal. The views towards Oxford from here are especially beautiful. Elsfield's history is well documented thanks to local researchers and archives. The Elsfield Village website hosts over 100 pages of detailed historical material, including stories of 19th century life, old photographs and accounts from long-time residents. The parish also has links to scholars such as Francis Wise, an 18th century antiquary who served as vicar of Elsfield. His work on local history and archaeology adds another layer of intellectual heritage to this village. Today we won't be embarking on a huge walk, far from it in fact. You can be through Elsfield in under half an hour, but I spent a bit longer than that on it. We have a lot to cover, from the church to the manor house and the life and works of John Buchan. The old school at Elsfield began as the parish's main place of education during the early 19th century, and its origins can be traced through written records from 1825. That makes the old school one of the earliest formal institutions in the village. No previous school existed in Elsfield. Children were instead sent to Stowood beforehand, and their education was paid for by Mrs. Oglander of Elsfield Manor. The earliest known teacher linked to Elsfield was Henry Else Chapman, who taught at Stowood and died in 1820. He's now buried in Elsfield's churchyard, and ironically, it's his death that may have encouraged the establishment of a school within Elsfield. The result was this, a school that's now a private house on the southern fringes of the village. I have to admit, it's great having the confidence to stand in the middle of the road knowing you're not going to get flattened. It's fantastic. Now, a little bit further up the road, it starts to bend. And when it bends, there's a church on the right-hand side. Now, we're going to skip past the church to start with, because it'll make more sense to you if we do the manor house next. And that's on the other side of the road over there. Let's go and find it. Next we have Elsfield Manor House, which has been a recorded residence of importance since at least the early 18th century. The manor house was owned by Sir George Pudsey until 1690, when it was sold to the North family. However, the present manor house was largely constructed by the Reverend Francis Wise, who was born in 1695 and became an antiquarian and a librarian at the Bodleian Library. Wise obtained the lease of Elsfield in 1726 from Francis North, Lord Guildford, one of his pupils at Oxford. Wise created the house's garden and filled it with antiquarian features, including a Roman altar, a watercourse and a small temple. Wise requested additional land in 1738 to enlarge the garden, including former ponds and a marshy area that he incorporated into his design. Wise's garden was visited at least once by Samuel Johnson, who both admired and mocked its unusual antiquarian layout. The presence of such visitors indicates that Wise used the manor not only as a residence, but also as a setting for scholarly gatherings. After his death in 1767, the manor house continued to be occupied by his sister, Margaret Wise. Following her, the house was lived in by Dr. Oglander, who served as Vicar of Elsfield from 1784 to 1825. The estate eventually passed to the Parsons family, who were bankers and owned the property during the 19th century. In 1919, Christ Church, Oxford purchased the estate from the Parsons family, but almost immediately separated the manor house from the wider landholding. Christ Church then sold the manor house, its outbuildings, and 20 acres of land to the writer and statesman John Buchan. He would use the garden as inspiration for settings in his fictional writings. Buchan wrote about the landscape around the manor with great affection too. Buchan lived at the manor house until 1935, when he was appointed Governor-General of Canada, although he did retain ownership until his death in 1940. A plaque on the manor doorway now commemorates his years in Elsfield. More on him in a little bit. In 1953, the Buchan family placed the manor house on the market, and it was purchased by Miriam Rothschild, a zoologist and entomologist born in 1908. Her arrival began a new scientific chapter in the manor's history. Miriam Rothschild undertook significant repairs and improvements to the manor house after purchasing it in 1953, as the property required extensive work at the time. It remained Rothschild-owned until 1976. Incidentally, the manor barn, located on the estate, is believed to be the oldest building in Elsfield, predating the manor house itself. The Rothschild archive states that during the English Civil War, Oliver Cromwell stored cannons in an adjacent stable block. Okay, so a few steps beyond Elsfield Manor, Elsfield just sort of stops. As you can see behind me there, it starts to run off into the countryside. Now that's partly true because, yes, it's mainly just one road up to the main road out of here, but there is a school to see at the very end of that road, but we'll do that separately. We'll do that at the very end. Now there's one thing we haven't covered here in Elsfield Village so far, and you know what that is already, that's the church. Now my original plan was to use a footpath here, which you can just about see here on the right hand side of your screen. That takes you to the church, but it was raining earlier this morning, so I'm not going to be using that footpath. Instead, I'm just going to turn around and walk back the way we've come, to be honest with you, because I don't really want to get wet feet. So back past the manor and manor cottages, which are the beautiful thatched buildings on the other side of the road, by the way, and we'll go and find the church. Now we come to St Thomas's Church, which stands on a rise overlooking the Cherwell Valley, and its earliest surviving feature is the chancel arch, which dates from around 1170 or 1180. The presence of such an early structure confirms that a church existed on this site before the 13th century. That's when it was rebuilt and then reconsecrated in 1273 by Reynold, Bishop of Cloyne. That consecration marked its dedication to St Thomas of Canterbury, who had been canonised in 1173. The ceremony took place on the 7th of July 1273, the feast of the translation of St Thomas. The church consists of a nave and a chancel with a south porch and a bellcote on the west gable. The bellcote is a later addition, but the basic layout has remained consistent since the medieval period. The font inside the church is a plain tub-shaped design on a square base and may date from before 1200. That makes it one of the oldest liturgical objects in the building. Its survival suggests that it was retained during the 13th century rebuilding. The church once had a north aisle, evidenced by two large arches and one smaller arch that formed its arcade. These arches were visible in the north wall of the nave until 1849, when they were removed during restoration. Two perpendicular Gothic windows flank the south doorway and were added in the 15th century. The pulpit is Jacobean, dating from the early 17th century, and includes an hourglass stand used for timing sermons. There's a monument to Michael Pudsey, who died in 1645, which incorporates the tombstone of John of Cheltenham, Abbot of Evesham, from 1317 to 1330. The medieval inscription was left unchanged when the stone was reused. The church underwent heavy restoration in 1849. A second phase of restoration took place in 1859 under the direction of G.E. Street. Then, in 1860, a mosaic reredos by the Venetian firm Salviati was installed in the chancel. It's one of the most visually important features inside the church today. The east window contains a stained glass memorial to the Reverend Richard Gordon, inserted in 1878. Gordon served as vicar of Elsfield during the 19th century and played a major role in parish life. The window is one of the few pieces of Victorian stained glass in the building. Then, of course, the church has a huge link to John Buchan, because the man himself rests in the churchyard. Buchan suffered a head injury after a fall in February 1940 and died shortly afterward in Montreal at the age of 64. He received a state funeral in Canada, which is an honour rarely given to non-Canadians. His ashes were then returned to the United Kingdom and interred in the churchyard here at Elsfield. Let's fill in a bit more about the man who once lived at Elsfield Manor. John Buchan was born on the 26th of August 1875 in Perth, Scotland, at what is now 18 to 20 York Place. He was the first child of the Reverend John Buchan, a minister of the Free Church of Scotland, and Helen Jane Buchan. His early years were shaped by frequent moves due to his father's church appointments, including a relocation to Kirkcaldy in Fife during his childhood. Buchan spent many summers with his maternal grandparents in Broughton in the Scottish borders, an area that influenced his later writing. He attended Hutchison's Grammar School in Glasgow after his father moved to the John Knox Church in the city in 1888. At school, he excelled in classics, which later became the foundation of his academic work. His strong performance earned him a scholarship to the University of Glasgow. Buchan began publishing early, releasing his first novel, Sir Quixote of the Moors, in 1895, just before entering Oxford University. This early publication demonstrated his ability to write fiction while still a student. His second novel, John Burnet of Barnes, followed in 1898. At Oxford, Buchan studied at Brasenose College and continued to write both fiction and historical essays. He also met Thomas Nelson, who would later employ him at the publishing firm Thomas Nelson and Sons. After university, Buchan trained for the English bar at the Middle Temple, supporting himself through journalism for The Spectator and Blackwood's magazine. He was called to the bar in 1901, although he never practiced law extensively. In 1901, Buchan accepted an invitation from Lord Milner to work in South Africa during the reconstruction of the Transvaal and Orange Free State after the Second Boer War. His time in South Africa also inspired his later novel, Prester John. Buchan returned to Britain in 1903 and resumed his legal and literary careers. In 1907, he married Susan Charlotte Grosvenor, a member of a well-known English family. That same year, he joined Thomas Nelson and Sons as a literary advisor and later became a director of the firm. During the First World War, Buchan was unfit for active combat, but contributed through writing and intelligence work. He wrote Nelson's History of the War, a 24-volume account published between 1915 and 1919, totalling more than 1 million words. Buchan's most famous novel, The 39 Steps, was published in 1915. It introduced the character Richard Hannay, who became central to several later novels. The book gained further fame when Alfred Hitchcock adapted it into a film in 1935. In all, Buchan wrote more than 100 books, including adventure fiction, biographies, histories, and essays. His political career ran alongside his continued writing, which he carried out in his spare time. In 1935, King George V appointed Buchan as Governor-General of Canada, acting on the advice of Canadian Prime Minister R.B. Bennett. 2 months later, Buchan was raised to the peerage as Baron Tweedsmuir of Elsfield, linking his title to this very Oxfordshire village. As Governor-General, Buchan encouraged stronger ties between Canada and the United States. In 1937, he became the first British figure to address the US Congress and also oversaw the first royal tour of Canada by a reigning monarch in 1939, when King George VI and Queen Elizabeth visited. During his time in Canada, Buchan continued to write, producing novels such as Sick Heart River. That novel is set partly in Canada and reflects his interest in the country's northern landscapes. He also wrote speeches and essays that contributed to Canadian cultural life. His autobiography, Memory Hold the Door, was published in 1940, the year of his death. The book provides insight into his writing process, political views, and personal experiences. It remains an important source for understanding his life and his career. Modern scholarship work continues to examine Buchan's work, particularly his influence on the adventure genre. His creation of the man on the run narrative in The 39 Steps has been widely recognised as a major contribution to thriller fiction. Lastly, we have the Forest Montessori School located at Forest Farm. The school operates as part of the Oxford Montessori Schools, an independent educational group founded in 1990. Forest Farm is the group's main site and houses both a primary and a senior school. The senior school is described as offering an alternative education inspired by Montessori ideals. In total, Forest has a capacity of 147 pupils and currently it has 131 enrolled. These numbers provide a factual measure of the school's size. It also includes a nursery provision too. And with that, we are done with Elsfield. The village settles behind us like a quiet page in a long book, probably one written by Buchan actually. It's full of detail you only notice once you've spent time within it. The heart of the village is St Thomas's Church, but Buchan turned the manor house here into something equally special, a literary gathering place. Not bad for a place that only had 40 houses in the 19th century, eh? The old school, the farms, the stone cottages and the quiet road that links them all here keep the scale of Elsfield intimate. Modern life touches the edges, but the core still feels rooted in its long past.
Elsfield sits above the Charwell's Bend, stone home shaped by man, a lifelong past. Paths once walked by Roman feet and Saxon folk, fields shaped by names that still seem to last. Wise-built gardens filled with ancient dreams, Johnson wandered through their crafted views. Buchan rode beneath the manor's beams, turning village scenes into something new. And the hill keeps its watch through each passing day, holding tales that the old walls keep safe. Trees, where the church on the rise feels the soft valley breeze. Elsfield, where the past still walks the green, where Buchan found a world that shaped the things he'd seen. St. Thomas' Arch still stands in Norman stone, fonts and windows shaped by hands long gone. Putsy's name rests carved in weathered slate, while the bell code calls with its steady tone. Old school doors once open wide each day, children the southern edge. Forest Farm now teaches in its own way, keeping learning alive beyond the hedge. And the hill keeps its watch through each passing day, holding tales that the old walls keep safe. Church on the rise
Hello folks, welcome back to South Oxfordshire for episode number 3. Now behind me here you can see some glorious open Oxfordshire countryside. Isn't it beautiful? There's actually a bridleway there, and if you walk on that, in 1.5 miles you'll be in a place called Barton. Now, if you are standing here and you're looking at that bridleway to Barton, you're actually standing opposite what is an ancient forest called Stowood. And you can't see much of the forest these days, most of it's private land, but you can drive through it using the road you can see there. And if you do drive on that road, you also pass this building. Now that used to be a pub called the Royal Oak. We'll talk a bit about that, we'll talk a bit about Stowood, and we'll also talk a bit about Harry Potter in this episode. Welcome to the parish of Beckley and Stowood. Beckley and Stowood, Brook Leering and Holywood. Today in South Oxfordshire we're taking on the parish of Beckley and Stowood. Located just to the northeast of Oxford, this includes the village of Beckley and the wooded hamlet of Stowood, both perched on high ground overlooking the wide wetlands of Otmore. The name Beckley comes from Old English. It combines beck, meaning brook or sometimes beach, and lea, meaning clearing or meadow. So the name likely means clearing by the brook or meadow beside a beechwood. Human activity here goes back to Roman times. If you remember the last time we were close to Otmore, you might recall the Roman road that we talked about that used to cross it. Today, we'll be walking on it. The road not only ran through the parish, it was a link between Dorchester-on-Thames and Alchester, and part of it survives today as a bridleway. In the 19th century, the remains of a Roman villa were found near Upper Park Farm, and artefacts from the site are now kept in the Ashmolean Museum. Before the Norman conquest, the manor belonged to Wygod of Wallingford, a powerful Saxon thane. After 1066, it passed to the Norman baron Robert D'Oyly through marriage to Wygod's daughter. Through the 12th and 13th centuries, Beckley passed through the hands of major families, including the St Valeries, the Earls of Cornwall, and even the Crown itself. Edward II, Richard II, and Henry V all had direct links to Beckley, meaning this one has a lot to do with England's royal story. There are some other stories to tell here as well, one involving Harry Potter. One of the most extraordinary landmarks in the parish is Beckley Park, a Grade 2 listed site with 3 concentric medieval moats, one of the rarest surviving arrangements in England. The moats once enclosed a royal hunting lodge used for medieval hunting parties and entertainments. The current house, built in the mid-16th century, stands within the moats and remains privately owned. Fans of Harry Potter will likely know it. It was used as part of a set for one of the Warner Brothers films. In this episode we'll find out which one. As for Stowood, the other half of the parish, that's quieter and more rural. Historically, Stowood was part of a royal forest, and the area still feels deeply wooded and secluded. It doesn't have much at all, but we will drive through it to begin our journey. Beckley's cottages and houses also tell a story. Many are built of local stone in the traditional Oxfordshire style, with some dating back to the 16th and 17th centuries. It's a village with a postcard-like charm. Let's get walking around it and admire its lovely beauty. We begin this episode with a drive through Stowood. You would do well to actually define this as a settlement, because essentially Stowood is exactly what it sounds like. It's a wood. Most of this wooded area is close to the road, the B4027. Other than the trees, there are 2 things which stand out along this road. Both of them are former pubs, and they go by the names the Royal Oak and the New Inn. First up, it's the Royal Oak, which you would perhaps miss if you didn't know it to be there. The former Royal Oak stands on the northern side of the B4027 on high ground close to the edge of Stowood Forest. The building dates from the early to mid 17th century, making it over 350 years old. The structure was built using mainly limestone rubble, a typical material for rural Oxfordshire. The original layout followed a 2-unit lobby entrance plan, which was a common domestic arrangement in 17th century rural houses. This plan placed the main entrance beside a large central chimney stack, which still survives today. The building later gained an 18th century extension. The attached stables have a date stone that reads 1813/WC, which confirms the year of construction for that part of the building. Inside the building, Historic England notes a large open fireplace. It was therefore a typical high-quality rural house of the 1600s. And a house it originally was, but it definitely served as a public house at some point in its history. The exact years of its operation, however, are not known. The Royal Oak's roadside position, though, would certainly have made it a convenient stopping point for people. Also, given Stowood has a long history as part of a medieval royal forest, the existence of the pub makes sense for another reason. Royal forests required workers, foresters and travellers to move through the area, and buildings like the Royal Oak often developed to serve them. Now we're at the New Inn, again on the northern side of the road just before the turning to Beckley. Today it's known as New Inn Farmhouse, and it's a Grade 2 listed building. This one dates from the early to mid 18th century, and again it's built of limestone. Don't be fooled by the date stone of 1797. That only provides a precise date for that part of the building. The rear of the former inn includes two small outshuts, which are lean-to extensions built against the main structure. They were likely service rooms, storage areas, or working spaces. Now we've turned up the road towards Beckley. Before we start walking around the village, we have this steel giant to cover. This is the Oxford TV transmitter, also known as the Oxford Transmitting Station. It's on a piece of land that's 129.5 metres above sea level. The exactness of that height is important because the transmitter relies on elevated ground to broadcast its signals across a wide area. The transmitter is owned and operated by Arqiva, a major UK communications infrastructure company. This, their Oxford site, is one of its key installations in the region. The mast itself is a guyed steel lattice structure, which means it's held upright by tension steel cables anchored into the ground. That design is common for tall broadcast masts countrywide. The total height of the mast is 165.7 metres or 544 feet. That's the height, as is measured, to the top of the UHF television antenna that sits above the main steel structure. The steel lattice portion alone is 154.4 metres or 507 feet tall. Resultingly, this is one of the tallest structures in Oxfordshire. Its height allows it to transmit signals across a large part of central southern England, reaching towns such as Swindon, Banbury, Bicester and Reading, as well as Oxford, of course. The original transmitter at Beckley was built by the BBC in the early 1960s. It was built to provide VHF, FM radio and 405 line VHF television to Oxford and the surrounding area. This early system used a 2-tier Band 1 aerial for television and a 6-tier slot array for FM radio. A smaller 150-foot tower on the site carried receiving aerials. In 1968, the site was expanded to support high-power colour UHF television transmissions, which were being introduced across the UK at that time. The first UHF service broadcast from Beckley was BBC Two, which began on the 17th of February 1968. BBC One followed in May 1970, and ITV began broadcasting from the site in June 1970. The transmitter carried Channel 4 from its launch in November 1982, using the same high-power system already in place. The Oxford transmitter was one of the first 81 transmitters in the UK to carry digital terrestrial television when the service launched in 1998. By 1999, the site was broadcasting 12 separate television signals, 6 analogue and 6 digital. Now, the transmitter broadcasts a full range of Freeview television services, including BBC One South, ITV Meridian, Channel 4, Channel 5 and numerous HD channels. It also carries local television, including That's Oxfordshire, which is the designated local TV service for the region. The site also broadcasts national and local radio, including BBC Radio Oxford, BBC Radio 1, BBC Radio 2, BBC Radio 3 and BBC Radio 4. The transmitter is visible from the Oxford to Banbury railway line and from most of the villages around Otmore. Yes, very, very tall structure that, and certainly visible from a lot of places around Beckley, Stowood and a lot of the other villages. Now, speaking of Beckley, it's time to head into that now, where we're going to have our main walk. And it's a nice little village. I think you're going to enjoy it, and I think you're especially going to enjoy the fact that it's got a link to Harry Potter, but that's coming at the end of this episode. Our main walk around Beckley begins at the village hall on Main Street. The hall operates under a registered charity. It's recently built and newly equipped, giving it somewhat of a modern interior and up-to-date facilities. The most distinctive features of the hall are nothing to do with its facilities. Instead, it's the extensive panoramic views over Otmore and towards the Chilterns. It can, though, provide excellent facilities as well. This can seat 120 people if they're sat at tables. The hall also contains a well-fitted kitchen, and it has an extensive professional wall-hanging system throughout. That system allows artwork, photographs or display materials to be mounted safely and neatly. Because of this feature, the hall is described as an ideal arts venue. The hall sits beside a substantial grassy open space, an area which increases the hall's usefulness for large events that need both indoor and outdoor facilities. It goes by the name of Katie and George Park, although I've no idea who they are or were. Now, as we walk around this place, you will learn pretty quickly that this is on a hill, and a good way to know it's on a hill is what you can see from this playing field. Now, over there, the skyline is actually below the level of those trees because there's a valley over there. We all know what's down there, of course. If you followed my first run in Charwell last year, you'll know that's Otmore, and we will be mentioning that a couple of times in this episode, in fact. Here we have the former Methodist Chapel on Main Street. It's another Grade 2 listed building. The chapel was built in 1840 to replace an earlier chapel which is mentioned in Methodist records held by the National Archives. The building has a simple rectangular plan typical of small rural Methodist chapels built in the early 19th century. The chapel's front facade contains two tall lancet windows, each with stone surrounds. The side walls contain additional rectangular windows. The National Archives holds baptism registers from 1955 and 1958 for Beckley Methodist Chapel, which confirm it was still in religious use during the mid-20th century. Now closed, the building is a private residence today. Beckley has one pub, and this is it. Welcome to the Abingdon Arms, which is owned by the Beckley and Area Community Benefit Society. The society is made up of 280 local shareholders who jointly purchased the pub to secure its future. Day to day it's operated by Macpherson Hospitality and run by tenants Vicky and Dan. This ownership model is unusual in Oxfordshire. You can probably tell just by looking at it that this one's been around for a while. Indeed it has. The Abingdon Arms is a 17th century pub, making the building more than 300 years old. The age is significant because it confirms the pub existed long before modern Beckley developed into its current form. Now, supposedly, Evelyn Waugh drank at the Abingdon Arms after learning he'd received a third in his Oxford finals. In addition, the view from the pub is believed to have inspired Lewis Carroll's chessboard landscape in Through the Looking Glass. We already know all about that from last year because the pub has some glorious views over Otmore. If you want to know more about the Lewis Carroll connection, I've linked the Fencott and Murcott episode in today's end screen. The name is important here too, by the way. Abingdon Arms suggests a historical link to the Earl of Abingdon, who held land in the region during the 17th and 18th centuries. That time frame aligns with the period of the pub's construction, whilst under the Earl's influence. Now this next thing is something you can't see. Away to the north of Main Street there once stood a palace. It was on a patch of elevated ground and it was associated with Richard of Cornwall. The term palace in this context meant a medieval house and moated site. However, palace was used because Richard of Cornwall, who later became King of the Romans, commissioned the building. That association alone gives the site a documented royal connection. The construction of the palace began in 1227, but it didn't last long. The palace was destroyed in 1233, only 6 years after construction began. It was destroyed by Richard Seward, who attacked the property as retaliation for Richard of Cornwall's political actions. Basically, it was a reprisal for Richard of Cornwall's desertion of the Martial faction. Richard of Cornwall, by the way, was the brother of Henry III. He was one of the wealthiest men in Europe and was elected King of the Romans in 1257. Beckley Palace, although short-lived, was just one of his residences. Does anything survive of the palace now? Well, yes, but like I said, you can't see it. It's behind all these houses and there's no way to get to it legally. The remains take the form of earthworks which were part of its moat. The locals know it as Dover's Field. Here's something else you can't see, but for this it's certainly more prudent to use pictures. As we know from last year, Otmore covers a huge area, so big that it has land within several parishes around here. The part that lies within Beckley has the Otmore firing range. The range is owned by the MOD and is in active use. That means the land is controlled under defence regulations and public access is restricted. The MOD's long-term presence has shaped the land's use here for more than a century. The Royal Air Force acquired Otmore in 1920 for use as a bombing range. That was the beginning of formal military activity on the moor. Ever since, the MOD has owned parts of Otmore, using the area for RAF practice bombing until 1958. After 1958, the site continued to operate as a rifle range. It's certainly not a small site either. A significant part of Otmore lies within a designated danger area. Red flags are flown when firing is taking place, which is a standard safety measure on MOD training land. The range covers a large part of the Otmore site of special scientific interest. The SSSI covers 213 hectares, and the MOD-owned land is included within that protected area. Unusually then, this means that the firing range is part of a nationally recognised conservation site, even though it remains under military control. Okay, so we've now turned a corner and we are heading towards Beckley's school, which is somewhere up here, and just passing the church actually, but we'll get that on the way back from the school because it makes more sense to. You'll see why in a moment. There's a lovely thatched cottage just here. There's a few of them in Beckley actually. I think that one's probably my favourite so far. You never know, something else might top it yet. We'll soon find out. Now in the very far distance I can see Otmore between these houses. It looks very flooded at the moment, so even if I was able to see the rifle range, I think I might get a little bit wet, to be honest with you. I'd rather stay on terra firma anyway. Let's have a look at this school. Back into the village we have Beckley Church of England Primary School on Church Street. This is an academy converter which is part of the River Learning Trust. That's a multi-academy organisation that operates across Oxfordshire and extends into Swindon. The school serves children aged 4 to 11. There are 77 pupils on roll, meaning Beckley C of E is classified as a small primary school. This size also places it among the smaller schools within the River Learning Trust. The school's website states that pupils come from Beckley, Forest Hill, Elsfield, Stanton St John, Horton-cum-Studley and even some parts of Oxford. The school's vision is soar on wings like eagles, and that's taken from Isaiah 40:31. Now we come to the main religious building in Beckley. This is the Church of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's a Grade 1 listed building and was first listed on the 18th of July 1963. The church was originally Norman in its earliest form. Although much of the visible structure today is later, the Norman foundation establishes the church as one of the oldest surviving buildings in Beckley today. It was rebuilt in the 14th and 15th centuries. The chancel is 14th century, while the porch, the clerestory and many of the windows are 15th. The church is built of limestone rubble and has an aisled nave, a chancel, a central tower and a south porch. This layout is unusual because the tower stands in the centre of the building rather than at the western end. The central tower is 3 stages high and includes a circular stair turret. The south doorway is 15th century, but the door itself is 13th century with elaborate iron hinges that survive from the medieval period. That makes it one of the oldest surviving features of the church, and it's therefore among the most interesting. There are also some 14th and 15th century wall paintings, including a Virgin and Child, an Annunciation, a Weighing of Souls, and Torments of the Damned. There are also paintings of St. Peter, St. Paul, and a doom scene from the 15th century. By 1552, the tower contained 4 large bells and a Sanctus bell. The Sanctus bell has now been lost, but the main bells were later replaced and expanded to a ring of 5. The treble bell was cast in 1650 by Richard Keane of Woodstock, and the third bell in 1654 by the same founder. The fourth bell was cast in 1705 and the second in 1707. The tenor bell was cast in 1881 by Mears and Steinbank of the Whitechapel Bell Foundry. You won't hear them all chime though. The bells are currently unringable for technical reasons. Okay, so Monday and Tuesday this week, I didn't leave any of my usual cards in Woodeaton and Elsfield. The reason for that being, in Woodeaton, I was concentrating more on the road and not being flattened by cars, because as you remember, it was quite narrow, that place. And Elsfield, I never even saw a parish notice board. So we're going to make up for that here. Beckley and Stowood is going to get one, and my card is going in the church on the notice board just here. I think that's a good place for it to be. So there we are, Beckley and Stowood in the TVI books. Let's move on. Now we need to walk around the southern portion of Beckley Village to finish this amble off. We'll use 2 roads to do this. First of all, we have New Inn Road. You perhaps don't realise it here, but you're a long way above sea level at this point. Beckley sits on a piece of ground called Beckley Hill. At its peak, the elevation around here is 463 feet or 141 metres, placing it among the higher points in the local landscape. Most of Beckley sits at 400 feet, with the summit of the hill to the south of the village near Stowood. Most of Beckley Village lies on the northern slope of the hill, overlooking Otmore, and so now you can understand why the transmitter is located where it is, to the south of the village. This high ground was no problem for ancient civilizations. The Romans certainly knew how to cross it. This is Sand Lane, which is our ticket back to the start. It's also the modern version of the road that the Romans built across Otmore. On some maps, you'll see this marked as the Roman Way. It ran north to south between Dorchester-on-Thames and Alchester. On Otmore, the Roman way survives in two sections as a low earthwork visible on the ground as a raised linear feature. This survival is unusual because many Roman roads in Oxfordshire have been buried underneath modern roads or ploughed fields. The road was around 14 metres wide across Otmore. The two surviving sections are separated by a water-filled area known as the Pill, which cuts across the Roman alignment. The interruption divides the road into a 500-metre northern section and an 820-metre southern section. The northern section begins at the junction of the lane from Oddington with the lane north to Fencott. The southern section begins 110 metres south of the Pill and continues for 820 metres, running straight across Otmore before bending slightly to the southwest. When it hits Beckley, it eventually becomes this road we're on now, and then continues on as a bridleway over some fields towards Stowood and on to Oxford. It's certainly handy for us because it's a nice way to finish off the walk, and the scenery's not bad either. Okay, we've reached Woodperry Road again, and that means all I've got left to do on foot is walk back to the village hall where we began this episode. But of course, there are still a couple of things we've yet to talk about, including that Harry Potter connection, which I keep beating on about. Now, the Harry Potter connection is all to do with Beckley Park, which I can't get access to because it's a private house, private drive, private everything, basically private estate. So it's pictures for this. Last on the agenda here, we have the jewel in Beckley's crown. This is Beckley Park, positioned between the village and the wetlands of Otmore. Beckley Park is essentially a house, and it's famous for its 3 concentric moats, which encircle the house in a horseshoe-shaped ring. The house itself ain't bad. It's Tudor, date-wise, and made of brick. The moats, which date from the 14th century, originally formed part of a medieval royal hunting lodge complex. They are incomplete, but remain among the best preserved medieval moat systems in England. The moats are not merely decorative, they are archaeological survivals of a medieval deer park infrastructure. The inner moat surrounds the house, the middle moat is crossed by a 16th century 2-arch pedestrian bridge, and the outer moat marks the boundary of the lodge enclosure. The medieval deer park, first enclosed in the 12th century, was created from land held by Roger Divery. The park was later held by Richard, the Duke of Cornwall, the brother of Henry III, who temporarily lived at Beckley Palace. When Richard built the palace, he enclosed the deer park with a stone wall, parts of which still survive up to 1.5 metres high. The earliest lodge on this site was first mentioned in 1347, but it was rebuilt in 1376 for King Edward III. The hunting park was crown property for 2 centuries, and its keepers were appointed by the king. It had notable keepers including the Hampdens, the Verneys, and Sir John Williams, who was later better known as Lord Williams of Thame. The present house was built in 1540 by him. With its tall chimneys, narrow windows, and a fortified appearance, some people have described the house as castle-like, with sharp-roofed towers and a medieval arched stone bridge leading to the entrance. The 16th century pedestrian bridge across the middle moat is listed Grade 2 and built of rubble and brick. The bridge's cobbled path still bears the patina of centuries of use, with herbs such as rosemary and lavender growing in its crevices. Now, after Lord Williams, Beckley Park passed to the Norreys family, whose head was created Earl of Abingdon in the late 17th century. The estate remained with the Earls of Abingdon until 1920, when it was sold by the son of the 7th Earl. Clotilda and Percy Fielding purchased Beckley Park in 1919 in a show of wealth and power. They bought it for the pure romance of the place and restored the property, which had been largely untouched for years under tenant farmers. Percy Fielding, an architect, laid out the 4-acre topiary gardens in the 1920s, using yew and box to create geometric and whimsical shapes. Their daughter and later their granddaughter Amanda Fielding continued to preserve the house with minimal modern alteration. Today, Beckley Park is the headquarters of the Beckley Foundation, founded by Amanda Fielding. The Beckley Foundation is internationally known for its work in drug policy reform and neuroscience. It's from this magical haven where Fielding has run the organisation. Beckley Park has had other uses. It regularly gets used for photo shoots and as a film location, and that brings us to the connection it has with Warner Brothers. Beckley Park was often used by them for scenes which required a medieval or moated setting in the Harry Potter films. The one scene that everyone knows it for is right at the beginning of the 2005 film Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where Frank Bryce runs through a garden to the Riddle House. You're all going to be watching that scene after this now, aren't you? Beckley and Stowood linger in your mind in a way that only a hilltop parish with 1,000 years of stories can. Beckley sits high above Otmore, its position giving it long views across the wetlands that once formed part of a medieval royal hunting landscape. Beckley's lanes are lined with stone cottages, farmhouses and traces of earlier settlement, while Stowood's narrow roads wind through dense woodland that's remained largely unchanged for centuries. The Roman road between Dorchester-on-Thames and Alchester still passes through. Just beyond the village edge lies Beckley Park, the extraordinary triple-moated Tudor lodge built in 1540, still standing in its medieval deer park and with its connections to Harry Potter. Beckley and Stowood truly is a marvellous place. Let's see if tomorrow's offering is too.
A Roman road cut across Otmore's wide sweep, stone-set traces that the wetlands keep. 14 meters wide through the moorland air, yet the line still runs with its ancient flair. Guy Cable Tower with a broadcast roar, Swindon, Banbury, Reading and more. Colour and FM shaping Oxfordshire morns, 12 strong channels in the digital dawn. Beckley with Stowood high on the ridge, stone-built homes and the moor stretched wide. Beckley with Stowood bold on the hill, where woodland meets the wetlands tide. Molted earthworks on the northern rise, gone in fire by a rival's prize. Hidden traces where the palace lay, lost but living in the ground today. Bridge of stone with its cobbled stride, to Pieri curling on every side. Goblet of fire set the scene in bloom, Expecto Patronum through the moated gloom. Beckley with Stowood high on the ridge, brick and timber where the old roots stay. Beckley with Stowood bold on the hill, holding its past in the light of day.
Hello folks, welcome back to South Oxfordshire for episode number 4. Now this is an interesting little place. In fact, it's two places in one this, because there's a main village and there's a small hamlet which we'll visit first before we go for the main village walk. In the main village there's a cricket club that's got a very interesting name, and there's also an old school which you can see behind me here, which has become something called the Holford Centre now. Let's see what that's all about in the parish of Stanton, St John. Stanton St John, a stony farmstead belonging to the St Johns. Alright, let's go again with another South Oxfordshire parish. This time we're in Stanton St John. This is 4.5 miles northeast of Oxford, making it one of the closest historic hilltop villages to the city. The village stands 330 feet above sea level on the eastern brow of a group of hills. Stanton St John's landscape is shaped by geology. The western half of the parish sits on the Corallian beds, with Wheatley limestone capping the hills. To the east, the land drops to Oxford clay, creating a varied landscape of upland, plateau and low-lying fields. The name Stanton comes from the Old English words stan and tun, meaning stony farmstead. The St John part was added later, after the medieval St John family became lords of the manor. Long before the medieval village formed, the area saw Roman activity. We know from yesterday about the Roman road linking Dorchester-on-Thames with Alchester, and here that runs through the western part of the parish. In 1953, archaeologists found Roman remains 300 yards east of the parish church. In 1086, Stanton was held by Odo, the Bishop of Bio, the half-brother of William the Conqueror. His tenant was Ilbert de Lacy, who also held nearby Forest Hill. The de Lacy family lost the manor in around 1100 when Ilbert's son forfeited his lands to the crown. By 1149, the manor had passed to the St John family, who held it for more than 2 centuries. In 1526, New College, Oxford took over, and they still own land here today. The village has several 16th and 17th century stone houses, including Manor Farm and the house of John White, a Puritan minister born in Stanton St John in 1575. White later helped found the Massachusetts Bay Colony, earning him the nickname the Patriarch of Dorchester. During the English Civil War, Stanton St John was caught between Royalist Oxford and Parliamentarian forces. Royalist troops were stationed in the village in 1643 and 44, and Parliamentarian soldiers occupied it in 1646 during the Siege of Oxford. There's no such conflict today, or at least I hope there isn't. Today, Stanton St John is a peaceful village with a rich past, a beautiful medieval church, historic houses and footpaths that follow ancient routes. Visitors can walk the line of the Roman road, explore the 12th century church and enjoy views across the hills. Surprisingly, this one has a lot to cover. There's a small hamlet called Woodperry also within the boundaries, and that's a great place to begin. Woodperry doesn't have many houses. In fact, the settlement only really survives today thanks to one Woodperry house. It's a Grade 1 listed building that dominates the rest of the hamlet. The name Woodperry comes from the Old English words woodu and pirig, meaning the pear tree near the wood. This makes a bit of sense. The original settlement was linked to woodland and fruit trees, and the earliest inhabitants identified the place by a single landmark tree. Most of Woodperry has now been lost. It was once a village that disappeared at some point after 1540. Excavations in the 1950s uncovered evidence of the lost settlement, confirming that the medieval village once stood near the present Woodperry house. Woodperry no longer has a church, but it used to. The medieval village once had a chapel or a church, which disappeared after the settlement declined in the 16th century. Excavations in the 1950s uncovered foundations believed to be linked to the former church, confirming its existence. So this is Woodperry House, and don't worry, we're not trespassing here. There's a bridleway that runs through its drive. This house is the most important surviving structure in the area. It was built between 1728 and 1731 for John Morse, a London goldsmith and partner in the Child & Co. Bank. It was built to the designs of William Townsend, an Oxford architect involved in some of the major university buildings. The house is constructed of limestone ashlar and its facade includes rusticated pilasters and a triangular pediment. It's in the Palladian style. Oddly, John Morse never lived in this house. After buying Woburn House in Buckinghamshire, he left Woodbury unfinished. After his death in 1739, the property passed into trust under Child & Co., which completed the interior by 1748. By 1801, Woodbury House was owned by James Pears, a former carpenter who became Mayor of Oxford. In the 19th century, the house was enlarged, with new wings designed by Frederick Codd. Later owners included the Thompson family, who made their fortune in Oxford banking. In 2006, Woodbury House was sold for £20 million to financier Scott Young, and later sold again in 2009 to Pierre Lagrange, co-founder of GLG Partners. As of 2021, the house is owned by Rory Fleming, a member of the Fleming banking family. So yeah, there is a bridleway that runs through the front garden, I suppose, if you like, of Woodbury House. So that's totally legal for me to show you that from there. I'll tell you something that was a little bit difficult for me to do though, and that was find a place to park. I had to pull up on the road, which is sort of adjacent to the bridleway, which is not the easiest thing to do. It's quite a busy road, so I'll go as quick as I can. So I'm going to get back in the car now and we'll head for Stanton St John Village. Our walk around Stanton St John itself begins at the old school just off Wheatley Road. The building is officially listed Grade 2 under the name School House. It's a mid-18th century building constructed in around 1759. Its construction was funded by a bequest from Dame Elizabeth Holford, who left money for the education of poor children in Stanton St John in her will. It's built of limestone rubble with ashlar quoins and lintels, a typical construction method in 18th century Oxfordshire. The school was rebuilt or enlarged in 1874 during a period of national educational reform. It continued to educate the local children until 1984, after which the building became known as the Holford Centre, named after its original benefactor. As the Holford Centre, it's now used for parish meetings and local events. Its reuse preserved the building and kept it in public life, even though no children come here anymore. Well, at least not on a daily basis. Next door to the school is a recreation ground. Stanton has two of these. This is the main one, which is leased from New College, Oxford. It's where Cairns Fudge Cricket Club play, and they've been members of the Cherwell Cricket League since 2021. Before joining the Cherwell League, the club competed in the Oxfordshire Cricket Association, or OCA. The move placed the club into a larger regional league structure covering Oxfordshire, Buckinghamshire and Northamptonshire. The club has won several cup competitions. The Cherwell League history page records that Cairns Fudge won the Steve Dixon Memorial Cup in 2009, beating Chadlington. They also won the Telegraph Cup in 2012, beating Winslow Town, and again in 2013, beating Coombe. The club's name comes from former New Zealand cricketer Chris Cairns. When he retired from Test cricket, he went on to run a family fudge business called Cairns Fudge Limited. The founders of the club adopted the name after seeing his story on Sky Sports News. I have to admit, when I found out about how this cricket club got its name, I had to laugh too. But not for its absurdity, but more for a memory of my own. I used to have Brian Lara Cricket for the PlayStation. I'm sure a few of you guys maybe had Brian Lara Cricket too, if you're a cricket fan. And I remember playing as New Zealand and always getting quite a few wickets with Chris Cairns. He was a decent bowler back in his day. Right, time to move on. Anyone fancy a pint? We're off to the Talkhouse. We have two pubs to talk about next. One's open, the other one is very much closed. Here's the one that's open. It's called the Talk House and it stands on Wheatley Road. This road, by the way, was once part of a pre-Roman highway known as the Ridgeway. That means for centuries the Talk House has had an ideal location on one of the oldest routes in the region. It hasn't always been known as the Talk House though. It was formerly known as the George and it held that title for many decades. Either way, it's a Grade 2 listed building dating from the late 17th or early 18th century. It's got Cotswold stone walls, brick sections, timber framing and a partly thatched roof, typical of rural Oxfordshire. The front gable includes traditional lime plaster. In 2025, Property Conservation Services carried out repairs to the lime plaster gable, which had suffered from damp and structural damage. That team emphasised that lime plaster was the correct material for the building because it allows the structure to breathe and release moisture naturally. They also noted that the original gable would have been protected by timber lathes and lime render. The Talk House closed temporarily in December 2025, but it was taken over and reopened in January this year by Stephen Williams and Mark Miles, who had already opened 3 other Oxfordshire pubs in the previous year. So you can get a pint in here, but you can't in the Star. The former Star pub stood on Middle Road, which we're now walking up. It's a Grade 2 listed building, but it's now a house, not an inn. It carries a date stone marked 1723, indicating the year of construction for the main range. Parts of the building, though, are late 17th century. The Star operated as a public house for over 400 years, although the exact date of its first use as a pub is not recorded. The building's 17th century origins support a claim of long-term use, and that alone makes the Star one of the oldest recorded drinking establishments in the village. The Star was once owned by New College, Oxford, which acted as its landlord during the 2010s. They, though, would allow the lease to expire, and the Star therefore closed in 2013. It did reopen briefly in 2016, before closing again finally in September 2019. An online review from November 2016 describes the interior as having bare floorboards, exposed stone and an open fireplace. The same review notes that some rooms were dark and unused at the time. That confirms that the reopening involved a limited refurbishment, if any at all. In 2025, the Star was converted into a residential property, with additional new builds planned for the car park. But the building remains Grade 2 listed, ensuring that its historic features will be preserved even as its use changes. Never a good thing to see a pub that's gone to the wall, but at least that one is still in use as a house, I suppose. There is another pub which is up the road in the next village over, which has become something else now, apart from a private dwelling. We'll see that tomorrow. Now, as far as Stanton St John goes, we've still got quite a few other bits and bobs to cover. We're heading down this road, which is one way at the beginning and then it becomes two way at the pub. And we're going to follow this around the corner towards the village shop, which sells a bit more than just your average bread and milk. Next up, we have the village shop, which operates from number 14 Middle Road. It's the only shop in Stanton St John, and so it gets well used. You can pick up a bit more than just milk and bread in this shop though. The local cyclists out there might know why. Inside the shop is another business, Village Shop Bicycles. It specialises in second-hand bikes for adults and children. You can get men's bikes, women's bikes, hybrid bikes, road bikes and town and city bicycles here. The business was established in 2010 and was previously known as Oxford's Reconditioned Bicycles before moving to Stanton St John. It's family run, with a guy called Richard managing the bicycle workshop and another called Rowan running the village shop. Village Shop Bicycles offers free delivery to Oxford, but also nationwide delivery for £35. That allows customers outside Stanton St John to purchase bikes without visiting the actual shop. The delivery policy is one of the business's key features. All their second-hand bikes come with a 30-day warranty too. So where do they get the bikes from? Well, most come from Oxford, and they previously belonged to departing university students. Local bike shops that offer part exchange and donated bicycles from a local authority recycling centre also make up some of their stock. I was planning on calling into the shop here in Stanton, but it's closed at the moment, so that went south, didn't it? Never mind, it doesn't matter. Next up, we're heading to the village hall, which means walking up the main street through Stanton. Some beautiful houses along here. Let's check them out. The village hall at Stanton St John also stands on Middle Road. This is managed by Stanton St John Parish Council, according to the council's official website. The parish council uses the hall for meetings, including full council sessions and public consultations. Again, it's a modern building, like the one up the road in Beckley. The hall has a decent-sized car park and a wooden play area suitable for various ages that's attached to it. The car park is used for various public services, such as recycling drop-off points. Next we come to the War Memorial, which stands in the churchyard of St John the Baptist Church. This was erected in 1921 as a First World War memorial. It was designed by Thomas Rayson, an Oxford architect active in the early 20th century. The structure includes a Latin cross rising from a tapering octagonal shaft, which stands on an octagonal plinth and a two-stage octagonal base. The upper stage of the base lists the names of the 13 men who died in the First World War: Bert Atkins, Albert Colwell, Dennis Colwell, William Hickman, Joseph Matthews, Edwin Morby, Ernest Roberts, Herbert Scarsbrook, Alfred Turner and William Watts. An inscription reading 1939 to 1945 was added after the Second World War, along with the name of the one serviceman who died in that conflict. The memorial was repaired in 1990 after storm damage to the crosshead. St John the Baptist is a Grade 1 listed church, first designated on the 18th of July 1963. A church has existed on this site since the 12th century. The earliest surviving part of the present building is the North Arcade, which dates from around 1200 and is built in the transitional style. The chancel arch is also described as transitional, although it may have been rebuilt in around 1700. The arch marks the division between the nave and the chancel and preserves the architectural character of the early medieval church. The chancel itself was rebuilt in around 1300 and includes deep buttresses between pairs of lancet windows. There are 8 medieval bench ends in the chancel, rare woodwork that survives from the medieval period. The south aisle contains a 13th century lancet window in the west wall, but the aisle was probably widened in the late 14th century. The south door dates from the 14th century too, and the aisle includes 15th century square-headed windows. The tower was built in the 15th century and has 4 stages, diagonal buttresses, and a semi-octagonal stair turret topped with a short spire. The pulpit here is 17th century and it's carved with the arms of New College, Oxford. Interestingly, this church also contains a medieval stone mensa and medieval encaustic tiles recovered from the excavated church at Woodperry. Given what we already know about that church, it's fair to say they might be the only things left of it now. Memorials-wise, there are stone cartouches commemorating Francis Squibb and Judith Price, both of which retain much of their original colour. There's also a brass inscription to William Pudsey set in a partly gilt stone surround. And above the chancel arch hangs a painted panel of the Hanoverian Royal Arms dated 1801. This date corresponds to the Act of Union between Great Britain and Ireland. The presence of these arms confirms the church's connection to national history. Now, many people have been baptised in this church, but among the number is one John White, who was born in Stanton in 1575. He would go on to be known as the Patriarch of Dorchester. Who exactly was he? Well, let's find out. In the winter of 1575, right here in Stanton St John, a child was born who would one day help shape the destiny of a continent. He was John White, and he entered the world in a manor house leased from New College, Oxford. His baptism in the church marked the beginning of a life that would bridge the worlds of rural England and the emerging New England. White's early years unfolded in Stanton St John, but his family valued learning, and in 1587 he was sent to Winchester College. There, he absorbed the classical and theological foundations that would shape his ministry. His academic promise carried him to New College, Oxford, where he became a fellow in 1595 and completed his degree with distinction. Ordained into the Church of England, White was appointed rector of Holy Trinity Church in Dorchester in 1606. He would remain there for more than 4 decades, guiding the town through fire, famine, plague, and the turbulence of the early Stuart period. A moderate Puritan, he sought not to break from the church, but to purify it, encouraging moral discipline, charitable works, and earnest preaching. His parish became a model of reformed civic life, where church governance, education, and poor relief were woven together with unusual coherence. Yet, White's vision extended far beyond Dorset. As England's Puritan community faced increasing pressure under King Charles I and Archbishop Laud, White began to imagine a place where godly families could build a new society. His first experiment came in the early 1620s with the Dorchester Company, a group of merchants who attempted to establish a fishing station at Cape Ann in New England. Though the venture faltered, White refused to abandon the dream. Drawing on his formidable organisational skills, he helped secure a new royal patent in 1628 for a more ambitious enterprise, the Massachusetts Bay Company. White recruited settlers from the West Country, and the group sailed on the Mary and John in 1630. Many of the emigrants founded the town of Dorchester, Massachusetts, carrying White's influence across the Atlantic. Though he never emigrated himself, White's hand can be seen in the early structures of New England society. His contemporaries recognised his leadership, and later generations honoured him with the title the Patriarch of Dorchester. White continued his ministry in Dorset through the English Civil War, navigating political upheaval with characteristic steadiness. He died in 1648 and was buried in Dorchester, far from the American settlements he helped bring into being. Yet his legacy endures on both sides of the ocean, both in the Church of Stanton St John, where his life began, and in the thriving communities of Massachusetts that grew from his vision. Okay, so after the church, we are then into an area that looks a little bit barren, to be honest with you. Here's what I can see right now. And the road just basically loops round to the left. You keep turning left, you eventually pass a farm, and then you're onto the main road that runs through Stanton St John from north to south. It's mainly housing that's left. So, yeah, let's have a look at it all, shall we? Lastly, here in Stanton, we have to talk about Rectory Farm on Pound Lane. Rectory Farm today operates as a pick-your-own farm and a farm shop, according to its official website. The business grows fruit, vegetables and flowers across 45 acres of cultivated fields. The farm opens every year in March, beginning with asparagus and rhubarb. As well as being open to the public, the farm also supplies produce wholesale, so it functions as a commercial agricultural business as well as a visitor attraction. The farm shop is open from March to December, and it sells the farm's own produce when in season, including several varieties of potatoes harvested on site. The shop also stocks local products such as poultry, lamb, beef, pies, cheeses and bread sourced from suppliers in Oxfordshire. The farm also includes a cafe known as the Tractor Shack, which offers Dark Horse roastery coffee, homemade cakes, seasonal soups and ciabattas. The cafe is a central feature of the visitor experience. Rectory Farm was historically operated by the Stanley and Pickford families, who farmed the land before the modern PYO business was created. It's definitely worth your while to call in here and check it all out, and it's a good way to end this episode too. And that's it for Stanton St John, and it leaves you with the sense of a village that's carried its own story for a long time. There's lots to admire. Take St John the Baptist Church at the centre, for example, a Grade 1 listed building with 12th century origins and later medieval additions. You've just got to love Stanton. The lovely lanes around the village leading to long established farms, including of course the one at Rectory, are just full of rural brilliance. Even Cairns Fudge Cricket Club, with its odd name, keeps sport alive in this timeless rural setting. Even the pubs, the former Star and the Talkhouse, contribute to the sense of a place shaped by a long local life that isn't going to change in a hurry. Stanton St John has been quietly getting on with things for nearly 1,000 years, and so it shall continue.
Rolled by the churchyard ground, Woodbury's lost dwellings still linger around. New college fields stretch under open sky, Cairns fudge on the green keeping spirits high. Paths through wheat and limestone guide the day, old walls breathe life in their own steady way. Stand in St. John, where the bells still call, where the tower stands firm and the seasons fall, where the brook keeps turning the tales of the mill, and the past feels close on the crest of the hill. The talkhouse glows with a welcome light, while the star lives on in a home tonight. John White's first steps shaped a distant shore, yet his roots stayed deep by the churchyard door. Fields and footpaths carry all that came, every stone still holding its rightful name. Stanton St. John, where the bells still call, where the tower stands firm and the seasons fall, where the brook keeps
seasons fall, where the brook keeps turning, the tales of the mill, and the past feels close on the crest of the hill. Rectory farms each spring, with its fields in bloom, tractor shack warmth, cutting winter's gloom. A village alive with its timeless grace, Stanton St. John, an enduring place.
Hello everybody, welcome back to South Oxfordshire for episode number 5 this week. Now behind me there's a big hill. Not that you'd know it because there's some trees in the way. That over there is Shotover Hill, or as the French might say, Chateau Vert. Chateau Vert, Chateau Vert, meaning castle, green castle. I'll explain that as we get towards the end of this episode. Before we get towards all of that stuff though, we've got a lovely little village to walk around which goes by the name of Forest Hill. Now together, Forest Hill and Shotover make one parish. This is Forest Hill with Shotover. Forest Hill with Shotover, Forest Hill with a steep slope. Lastly this week we're in the parish of Forest Hill with Shotover, sitting just 3 miles east of Oxford. It includes the villages of Forest Hill and the hamlet of Shotover Cleeve and Shotover Edge, all surrounded by rolling countryside and ancient woodland. The parish name reflects its landscape. Forest Hill likely refers to its wooded slopes and elevated position, while Shotover is thought to come from Old English or Norman French roots, meaning steep slope or sheer hill. Although the modern parish was only created in 1881 by merging Forest Hill, Shotover and Shotover Hill Place, the area itself has been settled far longer. Archaeological finds on and around Shotover Hill show human activity stretching back to prehistoric times. The parish boundaries themselves hint at Saxon origins, as they appear to have been carved out of older territories belonging to Stanton St. John and Cuddesdon. Forest Hill first appears in the Domesday Book as part of the holdings linked to Robert D'Oyley, the guy who built Oxford Castle. The manorial history of Forest Hill is unusually rich. After the dissolution of the monasteries in the 1530s, the manor and much of its land passed into private hands, eventually becoming property of Lincoln College, Oxford. The college remains an important landowner in the parish today. Shotover was once extra-parochial land and was heavily wooded. It served as a royal hunting ground, and its steep slopes and dense trees made it a natural boundary. Only in the 19th century it was formally joined with Forest Hill to create what we know today. One of the parish's most striking landmarks is Shotover Park, a grand country estate with origins in the 17th century. The estate includes formal gardens, woodland and historic buildings. Its long driveway and sweeping views give visitors a sense of Old English grandeur. The parish church of St Nicholas in Forest Hill is another highlight. Built mainly in the transitional Norman style, it features a distinctive gabled bellcot and elegant stonework. The church was enlarged and restored in 1847 by Gilbert Scott. St Nicholas's church also has a remarkable literary connection. Its parish register records the 1625 baptism of Mary Powell, who later married the poet John Milton. Milton is believed to have spent time in Forest Hill during his courtship. Elsewhere, this one contains charming historic buildings, including old farmhouses, stone cottages and former coaching inns. Many of these appear in 19th century directories, which describe Forest Hill as a thriving rural community. Let's have a shufty. Let's get going with St Nicholas's Church in Forest Hill. This has documented origins reaching back to the early 12th century. The building began in 1129 as a quiet retreat for monks from Ossany Abbey in Oxford. It became the parish church of Forest Hill in 1273, when it was formally dedicated to St Nicholas. This dedication is unusual in Oxfordshire, where St Mary and St Peter dedications are more common. St Nicholas is therefore quite the distinctive choice. The oldest parts of the church date from the 12th century, including the chancel arch and several lancet windows, which survive as examples of early medieval stonework. The chancel contains 2 original lancets on the south side and 1 on the north, all dating from around 1200. The nave was partly rebuilt in the early 17th century, and that's confirmed by a round-headed window west of the porch, which belongs to that period. The presence of a 17th century roof dated 1630 also confirms that major work took place at the time. One of the most distinctive features of St Nicholas's Church is its gabled west bell turret. Historic England dates this turret to the 13th century, making it one of the oldest surviving parts of the structure. It contains 3 pointed openings and is supported by 2 large buttresses added later. The turret houses 2 bells dated 1652, a tenor and a treble, which were cast during the Commonwealth period. In 1852, the church underwent major expansion under the direction of Sir Gilbert Scott, one of the most influential Victorian church architects. Scott designed the north aisle, which was built by George Wyatt of Oxford. The east window of the chancel is a triplet designed by J.H. Parker, a noted Oxford architectural historian and restorer. The window replaced an earlier medieval opening and includes elaborate rear arches with freestanding shafts. Now, if you're driving to Forest Hill from Oxford, this is very simple to get to. All you have to do is drive up the A40 out of Risinghurst and Sandhills, and you then take a left turn and come up the hill, and that church is at the top of the hill. And once you've got past the church, the road name changes to Main Street, and the first house you see on Main Street is this one here. And I know this is good because this is where I've parked my car. Look at this beautiful house. That it's Manor Farm house. Let's move on. Let's see what else this place has got. Just up the road we have the cemetery at Forest Hill, about 1/4 mile north of St Nicholas's Church. It's known as Forest Hill Church Cemetery, although it's not physically attached to the church building. The separation makes it a distinct burial ground with its own history and management. The cemetery is managed by Forest Hill with Shotover Parish Council. It's rectangular in shape, enclosed by hedges and simple fencing according to Ordnance Survey mapping. The entrance is located directly off Main Street, giving easy access for visitors and funeral vehicles. There are 47 memorials at the cemetery, with 94% photographed and 2% recorded with GPS data. These numbers do not represent the total number of burials, but they confirm that the cemetery is modest in size. The creation of a separate cemetery north of the church suggests that the original churchyard reached capacity at some point. Many English parishes expanded their burial grounds in the 19th century, though the exact date of Forest Hill Cemetery is not explicitly clear. Next, we have the former Methodist chapel on Main Street, close to the centre of the village. The building is now a private house, but its original form is still recognisable. The chapel belonged to the Wesleyan Methodists originally. The front elevation includes a simple rectangular doorway and 2 windows with stone surrounds. The roof is pitched and covered with plain tiles. Forest Hill Village Hall now. The website Community First Oxfordshire describes this building as a Victorian village hall. This means it dates from the 19th century, a period when many rural halls were built for local meetings and events. The Victorian origin explains the hall's simple rectangular form and traditional materials. It's a building that's existed for more than 120 years. It's a single-storey structure that includes a small stage at one end. The hall can seat 50 people for dining and hold 80 people standing. Those are numbers that indicate this is geared more towards small-scale events rather than larger gatherings. Things like birthday parties, fundraising events and similar activities, let's say. The hall contains a refurbished kitchen. It has accessible toilets too, and it's also wheelchair accessible. Now, interestingly, the heating here uses a system that I thought had disappeared. It's provided by a coin-operated meter, costing approximately £1 per hour. Okay, while we're at the village hall, we may as well get this job out of the way. Parish notice board. There we go. TVI has been to Forest Hill with Shotover, and I imagine some people will see this straight away because there's something going on in this village hall right now. I can hear somebody inside, so hopefully when they come out they have a glance at the notice board and they see there's going to be a video of Forest Hill with Shotover on YouTube. Lovely. Next we come to the White Horse pub. This operates today as a Thai restaurant with a bar, according to camera's description. The building originally functioned as a traditional English pub before its conversion. The White Horse is an apt name given its whitewashed stone structure. It has two small rooms divided by a fireplace open on both sides. If you like your Thai food, this is definitely the place to come around here. Thai red and green curries, Fad Thai, Fad King stir fries and mixed starters such as vegetable spring rolls and chicken satay are all sure to get your mouth watering here. Chef specials such as tilapia fish in a light batter, sizzling weeping tiger steak and chu chi prawns are all available too. I'm getting hungry at this point. It might not be a standalone pub anymore, but the White Horse remains one of the few commercial venues in Forest Hill. Its dual function as a pub and Thai restaurant gives it a distinctive identity. It certainly fared a bit better than the other pub Forest Hill used to have. And here is that pub on the corner where Wheatley Road meets Main Street. This was the King's Arms, but it closed in 1994, leaving the White Horse as the only pub left in Forest Hill today. The pub is now a private house, but it does have a Grade 2 listing. The building dates from the early 18th century and may even be earlier. It's built of partly coursed limestone rubble and includes brick gable stacks. It consists of 2 wings forming an L-shaped footprint. It still has a substantial presence on Main Street, therefore. The central doorway on the front elevation is now blocked. Above that blocked doorway is a 20th century stone-slated canopy, added after the building ceased to function as a pub. The blocked doorway is one of the clearest signs of the building's former use. Okay, from this point onwards, the only thing that I've got left on my list in Forest Hill is the recreation ground, which we'll see in a few steps' time. The rest of it is mainly all housing, so yeah, a bit more residential stuff coming your way in a moment. When we finish the walk, we will then drive through Forest Hill and onto the A40 so that we can get a glimpse of Shotover Park. I won't be able to go into Shotover Park. I won't be able to see the big house that's in the centre of it because it's all private. But don't worry, there's pictures on the way for that. Forest Hill Recreation Ground now on Stanton Road. Stand in this for a little while and you will truly get to appreciate South Oxfordshire for what it is. The park has some great views of the rolling hills and the green fields around here. You see, Forest Hill is built on a hilltop and the recreation ground sits on the northern slope of that hill, which explains the open views. The site's position is also close to the boundary between the built-up area and the surrounding farmland, so nothing really gets in the way. In the park itself, the first feature visitors often notice is a large pirate ship play structure in the centre of the recreation ground. There's also a wooden climbing frame and a tall pyramid rope climbing frame too. The surrounding field includes goalposts, making it suitable for ball games. I love it when my internet research proper does do me a solid, because it said that you can get some great views from this park, and you can in all directions. If you stood over there, you get a great view across to the east, and if you come this way, you get a great view across to the west as well. If you walk through the trees, that is. And you know what? On a day like today, the views just look all that much better, don't they? And I'm a sucker for a nice view. Oxfordshire has plenty of them, doesn't it? So that's Forest Hill, so what about Shotover? Well, now we're heading for it, but we won't be able to see a lot. You see, Shotover is mainly defined by a private estate, and therefore we can't get access to the biggest features. Now, the name Shotover has uncertain origins, but one suggestion is that it comes from the French Chateau Vert, meaning green castle, perhaps referring to a Norman royal hunting lodge once on the site. Another theory links it to the Old English Scoet Ofer, meaning upper spur, which fits the hilltop position of Shotover Hill. In the Domesday Book, the area appears as Scottorn, and later medieval records used forms such as Scoter, Shoter, Shothor, and Shotlovra. The most likely idea is maybe steep slope or sheer hill. Whatever you want to believe, you can't deny that building a grand house in this lovely old area was a bloody good idea, and that brings us to Shotover Park. Here's a bit about that. Shotover Park, which is also called Shotover House, is an 18th century country house and parkland on the northern and eastern slopes of Shotover Hill. It lies about 3 miles east of Oxford above the London to Oxford corridor and is part of the wider Shotover estate. The land that became Shotover Park formed part of the Royal Forest of Wychwood from at least Domesday times. As a royal forest, it provided hunting for the crown and timber for major buildings in Oxford, while local people used parts of it for grazing and fuel under strict forest law. Before the present house, there was an older residence on the site, described in later sources as ancient. In 1566, Queen Elizabeth I ended a visit to Oxford with a reception at Shotover, where Oxford orator Roger Marbeck delivered a speech praising the university and the Queen's support. On leaving Shotover, Elizabeth is recorded as saying, "Farewell, the learned University of Oxford. Farewell, my good subjects there. Farewell, my dear scholars, and pray God prosper your studies." That's high praise, but isn't it mildly ironic given who it came from? Well, maybe a little bit. In the late 1670s and early 1680s, the philosopher John Locke was a frequent visitor to Shotover. When he was forced to flee to Holland in 1683, he stored books and papers at Shotover for safekeeping, using the house as a secure refuge for his manuscripts. Shotover came into the possession of the Tyrrell family in the early 17th century after a hunting accident involving Sir Timothy Tyrrell, who was master of the buckhounds to Henry, Prince of Wales. According to tradition, the prince accidentally injured Tyrrell during a hunt. By way of compensation, he granted him the Shotover estate. Whether every detail of the story is exact or not, the Tyrrells were firmly established at Shotover by the mid-1600s and remained central to its development. Before the present mansion, the Tyrrells occupied a house known as Shotover Lodge, which stood on or near the current site. The existing Shotover house was built for James Tyrrell, probably between about 1714 and 1720, replacing or greatly enlarging the earlier lodge. Shotover House's design is attributed possibly to the Oxford mason architect William Townsend, although this is not certain. The house is built in limestone with a classical facade and is arranged over several stories, typical of early 18th century country houses in the region. The registered park and garden around Shotover House covers land on the north and east slopes of Shotover Hill and is itself Grade 1 listed. The park was carefully planned to take advantage of the hill's contours, with long views and water features forming part of the designed setting. Shotover Park should not be confused with City Council as a public nature reserve. Shotover Country Park covers about 117 hectares and is a designated site of special scientific interest. Over the later 18th and early 19th centuries, the estate saw changes to its planting, drives and garden structures, as was common on large country estates at the time. The house was renovated in 1855 with work attributed to architect Joshua Sims, who updated parts of the interior and the exterior. In addition to the main house, there are numerous listed structures within Shotover Park, including garden buildings and estate features. The park and the garden listing notes that 18 separate structures on the property are listed in their own right. As we drive away towards Oxford here, we leave Forest Hill with Shotover behind, and it feels like a compact parish stitched around one long hill and its stories. Where else in Oxfordshire can you find a place like it? Forest Hill itself runs along Main Street and Wheatley Road, with St Nicholas's Church tucked just off the main line of houses. The White Horse pub on Wheatley Road adds food, drink and a Thai menu to the village, with cask ales still poured at the bar. Now, one last thought: if Shotover did indeed start as Chateau Vert, then it's probably the only place in Oxfordshire where the French got to name the view and the English got to keep the hill. That feels like a very diplomatic draw.
Forest Hill with Shotover, where St. Nicholas keeps its vigil, carved in stone since early days. Forest Hill with Shotover, where the fields around the village hold their calm in countless ways. Forest Hill with Shotover, Gilbert Scott shaped new foundations, built the isle with a local stone. Forest Hill with Shotover, where the register remembers Mary Powell, a name once well known. Forest Hill with Shotover, where the hilltop meets the sky, where the White Horse serves its dishes, and the views are running high.
Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.